I'm Charles Galda, President of Vision New England, and your host for the Church in Action. This week, we're talking to Pastor Bryan Cerrone, Waterbury Campus Pastor at Walnut Hill Community Church. And we'll be talking about his new book, Embers of Hope, When Depression Comes to the Church. And you can order that on Amazon. We'll mention that again towards the end. I'm Charles Galda, your host for the Church in Action program. Bryan, thanks for being with us.
Oh, thanks for having me.
And Bryan, for folks who don't know you, don't know Walnut Hill, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and a little bit about Walnut Hill?
Yes. So again, my name is Bryan, and I'm the campus pastor of Walnut Hill Community Church down in Connecticut. I'll be starting my 5th year here right in January, and I absolutely love it. Walnut Hill is a non-denominational church with 4 campuses, well, 5 including the online, spread throughout Connecticut. And we seek to ignite a passion for Jesus right here in Connecticut and around the world. So that's just a little bit about who I am.
And now, what can you share with us a little about where you're from, how you came to be at Walnut Hill, family, whatever you're comfortable letting us know?
Yes. So I'm originally from Springfield, Massachusetts. Did a lot of my schooling in the eastern part of Massachusetts at Gordon College. Prior to coming here to Walnut Hill Community Church in 2020, the very end of 2020, I was actually down in North Carolina for 4 years serving as a youth pastor down there. But it may not surprise everyone, but we happen to have gone through a pandemic. And so while I was down there, the pandemic literally closed down everything. And so my wife and I were down there with our 3 kids. And everything was online. We had to do virtual schooling, which is challenging with kids. And we just didn't have a lot of family support. And so we felt that was a clear call to actually go back to New England, which was always our plan to begin with. We just didn't know when. And so we sensed that was the right time. And in 2020, I'm looking for, where does God want me to serve at? There weren't a whole lot of options at that time because all the churches were virtual. But Walnut Hill came up and it had piqued my interest. And so I put my name in, I prayed about it, and through a long process of interviews, Walnut Hill called me on as the campus pastor. And so I officially started in January of 2021.
I always tell New England pastors it's perfectly acceptable to go serve outside New England. Then you repent of it and you don't do it again.
I won't be doing that again. I love it here.
Well, let's talk about your book a little bit, Bryan. So it's Embers of Hope, When Depression Comes to the Church. And in it, you share a lot of your own journey. To frame up the conversation, can you tell us a little about your story growing up and some of the mental health challenges you talk about in the book?
Yeah, and for sake of time, I don't want to get too deep into it. But growing up, I was a foster kid. I don't know my biological father. He left before I was even born. I only lived with my mother until I was about a year or 2 years old, because she had a lot of drug issues, alcohol issues, and at about that time when I was 2, I was thrown into the system, right up here in Massachusetts, and traveled anywhere. I lost count of how many homes I've been through, 15, 20, 25 homes. And it wasn't a great experience. It was traumatic, experiencing a lot of the emotional, sexual, physical abuse that I had to go through. And as I got older into middle school, I became very, very angry, questioning, okay, God, where were you? If you're so good, why couldn't you do anything? Going through all those classic questions. And then I got saved. I got redeemed. Jesus captures my heart right in 8th grade. And I was up in upstate New York at a large conference that I didn't originally want to go to. But there was a lot of girls there in 8th grade. So I was like, sign me up. I'll go. But God had other plans, and he got me. But as I got older, Jesus healed a lot of things in my life, but I still struggled a lot with the past and how to cope with things and how to deal with things and just all that. And as I got older, I just had to really work really, really hard to make sure that I'm keeping myself in check. I had identity issues, wondering, stemming from the fact that I didn't have a father. For a while, I projected the idea of not having an earthly father and maybe having some poor examples of fathers in foster care on, hey, that must be who God is. But no, that's not who God is. But it took me a while to get over that. And so fast forward, here I am just a year and a half ago, as a pastor, as a campus pastor at Walnut Hill Community Church. I went through a really dark season. It was dark. So between December and March, my wife and I went through some incredible difficulties. In December, a couple of years ago, her 7-year-old brother passed away, and right in her arms, and that was a very difficult thing for all of us. And then in March, her sister in her early 20s also passed away. And she struggled with depression and mental health. But right in the middle of those 3 or 4 months, my wife and I also miscarried twins, and that was just a lot to go through. And as a pastor, I had to fight these thoughts in my head, like, no, you're a pastor. You can't be sad. You can't be depressed. You got to be strong. But I wasn't strong. I got really, really down. I didn't know how to navigate all this stuff. All my seminary education didn't prep me for that. And so I just kind of held it in, didn't know how to cope with it. A month later, I want to say August, that following August, I was just really melancholy. I think that's the correct word. I sat down at home. I was by myself, my wife and the kids. We had 5 kids at this time. Went off to her parents. I started a fire pit, and I just wanted to sit down. I sat down in my chair. I looked at the raging fire, just contemplating life, saying, God, where are you? But after minutes and moments passed, I realized that the fire was no more. I looked at the fire, and I got up to kind of bring it back up, to bring it back to life. And as a good Eagle Scout, I tried everything. But here's the thing, nothing I did worked. So I kind of gave up. I sat down in my chair, I looked at the sky, looked at the fireplace, and all I saw were a couple embers in there. And I remember looking at those embers, and then I looked up to God, and I said, you know what, God? I don't know what you can do with an ember, but that's all I got left in my soul. And I just said that in full transparency, not in a way of giving up, but in a way of crying out to God, God, help me. And so from that moment, I took 4 nights and just started to journal. Embers of Hope started off at the journal entry, just outlining my thoughts. And then it was very clear that God wanted me to keep going, keep exploring with some of the characters in the Bible that were going through the very same things as me, and to keep writing. And so in 4 nights, 4 late nights in that August, I wrote 80% of Embers of Hope. And then I put it down because life got busy. I mean, that's kind of what happens when the holidays come. You got 5 kids to raise, and you just kind of, you get busy. Yeah. But I had a persistent friend at church here. His name is David, and he would text me every single day. Did you finish? Did you finish? Did you finish? And then finally, in the holidays of last year, at this time, I decided to finish the last 20% of Embers of Hope and submitted it. And that's kind of where Embers of Hope came from, and the idea of, connecting the fireplace incident of that night and the cover title and all that.
And so in the book, you're fairly transparent, or quite transparent, about the issues that you've had that all play into this. And so what do you think the goal is that you have for writing the book? Is it therapeutic for you? Is it to try and help other people? Is it a message for the church? Is it something else?
It's a mixture of of everything. I process best when I write things. Growing up, I could never defend myself publicly speaking. I was always looked down upon, shot down upon. Couldn't let nobody could let my words finish, right? And so I had to write. And so for me, starting this book at the journal entry was a way that was very therapeutic for me to process everything going on inside of me. But it became very clear that God had something else in mind as well. He wanted this to go further, which was scary because being transparent and vulnerable as a leader in the church it scares me even to this day. It is scary, but I thank God that Walnut Hill has treated me with such kindness and compassion throughout this process. But as I look at the book, I guess I kind of have a few goals and hopes with it. The first thing is to begin a conversation. I don't claim to have all the answers. But I want to open up a conversation in Christian circles and churches surrounding depression, mental health, our faith, and what it all means, because I'm not so sure that we've done so well as the American church with creating space for this. And I think the second thing is that my hope is that there's 10 chapters, and each chapter is devoted to a major Bible character who had depression. They just didn't have that name for it, right? And so with that said, I want to show that God can use you in me with all of our emotional up and downs to do extraordinary things, just like he did with those Bible characters that we read. They don't have to be so far removed. And sometimes I think we do that by calling them our heroes of the faith. Well, God did that for them, but not for me. No. They were just like you and me. And so I explore a lot with that. And then I think the third thing is a goal I have is to help people fall in love with the Bible. I'll be incredibly honest with you, Charles. Having gone through Gordon College and Gordon Conwell and seminary and everything like that, we know everything, right? No, we don't. And as I started to research about all these characters, King David and everything like that, I started to whoa, I didn't know that. I did, but I didn't. And I think one of the reasons is because in a fast-paced evangelical church in America, we want to read the Bible in a year. We want to do things quick. We want to skip over the uncomfortable. We just want to get to the point. And in doing so, we miss out on something that God wants to speak to you intimately. And so I want to help people to fall in love with Scripture again.
Yeah, Richard Foster in Celebration of the Disciplines, his opening sentence, and I may not get it verbatim, is superficiality is the plague of civilization.
Yes.
We're superficial in how we read. Even those of us who are Bible readers are so superficial and not taking the time to think about what does this mean then, right? We look at David and we don't necessarily connect the word to depression. Now, the Bible didn't have that word, to your point. We can see all of those traits that you would say that he's going through bouts of serious depression. I know people look at Lincoln's life and would say the same thing about Lincoln's life, and they just didn't have the word. And so a lot of times in the church that gets translated because we're missing some of those things. We can take a view that that these are spiritual issues then, and that if your spiritual life were right, then you wouldn't be having these things, because Scripture says don't worry about anything. So stop worrying about things and stop being depressed. What would you say to somebody who maybe doesn't have it that formed and wouldn't say those words, but kind of is coming from that perspective?
So I think we're entering into the question of, so what are some helpful things and unhelpful things to say, right, to somebody that struggles with depression? Well, before I answer that, a majority of people in our pews are struggling with it. That is so important to understand, but they're keeping it in because on Sunday mornings we've been so conditioned to think that Sunday mornings is happy hour. Yeah. It's dress right, say the right things, be good, put your problems away. Nobody wants to hear it, and as a result, we're not being real and authentic, And so I wonder what happens if we can turn, the tide on that. And I think some of the really unhelpful words, there's many things, right? And I've heard them all. Some of them were spoken to me. Is saying things that minimizes their feelings, somehow blaming them, like what sin do you have, or what did you do to bring this upon yourself, right? Or if you did this wouldn't be, right? Telling them to cheer up, as if, that doesn't work. I can't just cheer up. And I don't think Jesus expects that. I think somehow we feel like God is threatened by our feelings, and he's not. We want fast fixes, right? And that's everywhere. Raise your hand if you want to be saved. Great, you're saved. Tomorrow you better be a saint. It's just not how this works. And it's the same thing with our feelings. I think when we go through emotional up and downs, God is showing us something. God is showing us something. And for me, one of the things that he was showing me was to slow down. And and I think going through depression was God's way of shouting, because I was going so fast and I couldn't hear his whisper. And so he shouted, and he got my attention, and he had to work on a lot of things, a lot of identity issues, a lot of unhealed things in my life from the past. And it was amazing. I was able to see God as Abba, as Father, as infinite, and not just God that's abstract, right? And I think another thing that we try to do that's not really helpful is we try to solve their problems. Job's friends try to solve their problems. Don't try to solve their problems. Just be there and listen. And so that kind of gets into, okay, so what are some helpful things to do? Express empathy without a time limit. Oftentimes we're willing to come alongside someone, but for a short period of time before our patience wears out. We can't put a time limit on how people navigate emotions and difficulties. I think we want to listen, but we can't listen unless we're in proximity. And it's hard to be in proximity if church is only 1 hour a week, right? And so we want to do that. We want to offer support, even if we don't really know what that looks like. Like, hey, how can I be there for you? How can I, whatever. It's the gesture of caring that matters. We want to acknowledge that their feelings are valid. We don't want to put political labels on them. We don't want to do any of that. And so I think those are just a few helpful and unhelpful things to kind of be aware when we're working and encountering people who are just going through these up and downs of life.
And when we're saying, think about David's a great example, right? For the people who would say, well, no, in a church, you shouldn't have these issues. Like, well, so then you're going to go to David and say, David, knock it off. Right. And David was a man after God's own heart. So we have the biblical example of somebody who's spiritually mature, not perfect, because none of us are, but spiritually mature and still struggling with these kinds of issues. And I think we would both say we know people who are spiritually mature, serious, committed Christians with robust spiritual lives who struggle with things like depression, just like some of us struggle with other things that maybe isn't depression. And so I think we do need to step back for a little bit and see, do we have that perspective that this is just a spiritual issue, and recognize that there's certainly things in our lives that can be a spiritual issue. And I don't think any of us would say it's not the case, but that doesn't mean everything is a spiritual issue.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
And so your point about there's people in our churches who are dealing with this. And have you ever spoken about this from the pulpit in church or in some kind of small group or something like that? And if so, what was the reaction?
So a couple of things on that. More so now since the book has launched and has opened up numerous opportunities to speak on this. And since the launch of Embers of Hope, I've had many, many people come up with emails, text conversations, going out for coffee, just kind of dumping out everything that's inside of them and being so relieved to do so, But I think coming in as a pastor, one of the goals I've always had was to be transparent and vulnerable. And so since day one at Walnut Hill, I've always interweaved very transparent and vulnerable stories into my sermons to kind of break down the barriers. If they see their pastor struggling with things, then maybe it'll give them the courage to open up and not hide it anymore, so that there can be some true healing in Jesus, right? And so that's the first half is taking those 3 to 4 years and really breaking down barriers little by little. Going forward in 2025, yes, we have plans to launch maybe not just Embers of Hope community group where we go through the book, because it's not about me. It's not about the title. It's about a conversation starter. It's about let's usher in a new era of how we do church, and let's see some major healing happening. And so I think I'm really happy to hear that more and more churches are becoming aware of this, because the mental health crisis is skyrocketing to numbers that we've never seen before, and is showing no signs of slowing down. And churches are supposed to be safe havens where they can meet Jesus and find healing. And so, for lack of better words, or for a crass wording of this, let's get with the program. Let's get with the program and do what we're supposed to be doing here,
Yeah, every time I've talked to a pastor who has talked about this from the pulpit, for example, either their own issues or in their family, they all say the same thing that you're saying, is it suddenly gave everybody permission to be honest about it with each other. And they get all of these people coming up sharing that this has been my journey. This is where I'm dealing with these same issues. And so so I think your point is something we see on a broader basis than just Walnut Hill, for sure, is that as soon as you do it, you give permission for us to do it. And we're not going to deal with and so without that, I hide it from everybody in my church, which is the place where I should be going for help. Right.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And so what would you say to a pastor, for example, listening to this and saying, or somebody who maybe is struggling with mental health issues, whether it's depression or something else, of how do we get our churches to be safe places for this kind of thing? What would you suggest they do? Yeah,
so we got to create spaces. Overnight big change doesn't it's not always successful, right? And so you want to start off with small spaces. I know for Walnut Hill, we have mental health drop-ins every week where people can come in. It's a safe spot. What is said in those groups stays there, right? There's power and healing when we share with other people who are going through the same exact things as we're going. So I think that's number one, is creating safe spaces, community groups, crew groups, whatever it looks like to do this. Right. And I think number two, we touched on it a little bit, is it's got to come from the pulpit. It doesn't matter what you do in community groups. It doesn't matter what you talk about. If it's not coming from the pulpit, I fear that we can only go so far, and that's not far enough when it comes to all this. So it's got to be preached on. It's got to be named. It's got to be clear what we're talking about here. I also think encourage a slower pace. And I'm saying this right in the middle of Christmas season. Slow down. Slow down. And I get it. Maybe this is fantasy thinking, right? But we're going so fast, and we're not allowing people to breathe. And I'm so thankful that at Walnut Hill that we give our pastors vacation time and Sabbath times and days off time. They stress that so much, and so I would say to any pastor is start that with your staff. Just because they don't have a pastor title, treat them as a pastor. Give them the Sabbath, give them the sabbatical, give them the day off. Because if they're not healthy, then the people that we're trying to lead won't be either. They can only rise to the level of his leaders. And so let's start off with staffing. And I think another thing, and this is my last point of what we can do, is recognize that we're also not professionals in this area. So I make that very clear in the book that I am not a therapist. By the way, I think therapy is a great thing, and I wish everybody would be in it before it's too late. Recognize that we are not professional therapists and counselors and mental health people. But so what do we do with that? Partner with local mental health professionals. Partner with them. I think a book came out not too long ago that kind of talks about what would it look like if the churches and counseling and therapy offices in the city really work together to speak life into this area. I think we need to do way better on that across all churches everywhere. It's to partner with them.
Yeah, I think it's such a good warning, Bryan, because we sometimes think we can go into a situation and either we're going to help or I didn't really help you. And we need to be very cognizant, and this in so many other places, we can actually do quite a bit of damage, not intending to, and not even and walk away not even realizing we did it.
Yep.
And so I do know, we do know of groups that have mental health groups, things like Can We Talk is a program a number of churches do, and they will have a clinician there to be able to spot somebody who needs more help. And so we need to realize that we are not loving care is not everything everybody needs. It's something everybody needs, but it's not going to solve everybody's problem. And some people need professional help. And so Walnut Hill is also a big Celebrate Recovery church, and Celebrate Recovery is trying to help people in this space, isn't it?
Yeah, and I think, Charles, you said something profound here, is that when we create those safe spaces, when we create mental health drop-ins, be ready. Be ready. I think when I came out with the book, I had a number of people kind of come to me and say, are you ready for the influx of people that's going to come to you? Do you have resources? So have those resources and what's available out there on hand. Yeah,
it's a great point. And to your point, there's groups that are part of agencies and government groups and other ministries who are all willing to help with those kinds of things. Absolutely. So Bryan, thanks so much for being with us. Appreciate your time. And again, the book is Embers of Hope. You can get it on Amazon and any place else you can buy books. So feel free to go there and get it. Bryan, thanks again, and God bless you.
God bless you, Charles. Thank you.
Appreciate it. To support this program and accelerate evangelism, go to visionnewengland.org and click on Donate, or click Member to become a partner with us. This program is supported by the Palau Association, who are dedicated to proclaiming the good news, uniting the church, and impacting cities worldwide.
At Leadership Transformations, we believe that when you have the right resources to help you slow down and experience a deep and refreshing connection to God, you can become the discerning leader you know you are created to be. Friends, Steve Macchia here, and I have a free gift for your soul. It's called Pathways. Pathways is our weekly email aimed at offering you soul-nourishing content for the journey. It contains readings, prayers, spiritual practices, a link to the Discerning Leader podcast, as well as information about all of our upcoming soul care retreats, workshops, and online offerings. So head on over to leadershiptransformations.org today and sign up for this free resource. It will help you slow down and be more. God bless you, friends.